Hello, everybody, and welcome to the reality show brought to you by the Ayn Rand Center UK, where we apply the practical philosophy of objectivism to everything, and particularly to current events. And we're sticking with the Israel theme and the conflict between Palestinians and Israel, and the effect that that conflict is having on our society and culture as a whole. Recently, a letter written by Osama bin Laden, which I think was published in the Guardian in 2002, where he claimed his reasons for attacking America on 9/11, proclaimed those reasons to the world, has now become a TikTok sensation, and the letter has become viral in the Gen Z and millennial worlds, where they think this letter legitimately represents a point of view that we need to really be discussing. In fact, many people who saw this letter, experienced this letter as Gen Zers and millennials, thought that it changed their entire world perspective, and they are now in an existential crisis. Should they be in an existential crisis? Did this letter contain anything new? Was Osama bin Laden justified in his attack of the United States? Are the Palestinians justified in their cause against Israel? I have a great group of folks here to discuss this who probably know quite a bit more about this than I do, so I'm going to defer to them. Alejandro, great to see you again. Kirk, Wilcox, and Anders. I don't know that I've met you before, Anders, so it's great to see you and great to welcome you on the panel. Let me start with you. What say you about this internet phenomenon with Osama bin Laden's letter, and what do you think it's saying about our culture?
Well, first, I'm too old to be on TikTok. I've been able to stay away from that for the most part. So, but overall, I mean, the letter itself, and I hadn't read it back in 2002. I'm obviously old enough to have had the opportunity, but when you start reading it, I actually read part of it this morning, and it reads a little bit like, for those of us here in the US, like a Unabomber manifesto or one of those school shooter manifestos. I mean, it's a truly evil letter, and it lays out Islamic fundamentalism loud and clear. So you can give Osama bin Laden credit for that. He's not hiding anything in that sense. The reaction is obviously appalling. Maybe I should be surprised, but I'm not. It's a reaction on the same anti-Semitic, altruist, nihilist theme that we've seen over the last few weeks, ever since the attacks happened. Palestinians, Hamas, are the underdogs, the victims of colonization, the exploited. So they instinctively deserve our support. And damn the context, damn the truth. Maybe some of them are mistaken and ignorant, which is then a verdict on our education system. But yeah, it's a little bit, again, for us here in the US who follow politics a little bit, we see people on the right who are Trump supporters. It's like Trump can do nothing wrong. And it starts to look like Hamas and the Palestinians here, they can't do anything wrong to these people who are so seemingly committed to their cause. So it's a sad state of affairs, but that's where we are.
Yeah, the oppression narrative rules the day, and it seems like Trump is even falling into the oppression narrative and gaining some cultural ground as a result. Hey, Kirk, it seemed to me that this TikTok sensation sort of was kicked off by young women. And I find it sort of ironic that young women would gravitate to a message like Osama bin Laden's, which is so palpably misogynistic. I mean, one of the things he hates about America are the gender spectrums that we have here, the homosexuality as a prevalent means of expressing sexuality, the freedom of women to live, go to school, work, be independent. These are things that he found disgusting and despicable that needed to be snuffed out. How do you explain the fact that these folks are gravitating to a side that would actually kill them if they had a chance?
The only explanation I can really think of, I just read this letter for the first time this morning. I tried finding it over the last few days, and I think I found other writings of bin Laden. I don't think it was this specific one because it sounded different other than like the rampant, anti-Semitism and calls for Sharia law and whatnot. But the only explanation I can give is because it's not a short read. And I imagine they just read like the anti-American foreign policy rants. They probably just read that and stopped short and said, oh yeah, because their worldview on America and geopolitics might already be shaped by anti-Americanism, blame America first for everything. Because yeah, as you said, after all of that, he gets into what he really wants. He says the first thing that we are calling on Americans to do is join Islam, and talking about how it's the real religion of freedom and peace and all of that gobbledygook. And then, yeah, as you said, Mark, later throughout this letter, he's talking about how insane it is that women are given freedom in places like America, and that Americans think of this as freedom. Like real liberation, I guess, in his eyes, is that women are subjugated to Allah and Islamia. And yeah, he also calls on Americans to end debaucherous acts like homosexuality and gambling and a lot of other stuff that Americans enjoy because of our freedom in America. Also, a strong contempt for usury and money lending at a profit. He's not a big fan of that. So I guess to answer your question, that's all I can think of is they probably only read the first few paragraphs about how bad American foreign policy is and how it's responsible for all the evils in the world, and didn't really read into the calls for Sharia law for Americans to embrace Islam. And even in the end of the letter, he talks about, I think he says, if Americans refuse to listen to our advice, then there will still be more war. They're still going to be quote unquote resisting. And one of those calls is, again, to join Islam and spread Sharia law.
I find it interesting,
as you said, is very anti-woman. Yeah.
So we have the Cliff Notes. We have a Cliff Notes culture now in the youth. They don't read the actual book. They don't read the actual letter. They just read the notes, the synopsis. And their understanding of history seems to go about as deep as a synopsis. Alejandro, what do you make of this irony? I mean, the millennials and the Gen Zers are steeped in this idea of diversity. They're steeped in this idea of gender spectrums. They're steeped in this idea of sort of liberation movements, and yet they're gravitating to some of the most illiberal ideas in the world.
I don't think that it's a contradiction in its fundamental ideas, in the sense that, first of all, the letter of bin Laden, I don't think that it's very original in the things that he's saying. He's mainly gravitating towards things that in the West have been said to be its main sources of guilt. So, for instance, he talks about that under your supervision, consent, and orders, the governments of our countries, which act as your agents, attack us on a daily basis. So it's the whole idea of the new colonialism, imperialism, and so on. And also he talks about how the West steals our wealth and oil and paltry prices because of you, international influence and military threats. So in that sense, it's not original. But if you think, why would this resonate so much with the younger people? First of all, as it has been said, it's basically because it's not different from what it's been taught in our schools. But the ideology that it's behind the things that it's been taught in the schools, yes, it has some sense of being pro something, that trans rights or some other kind of gender rights are recognized, and that's, I think, to some extent very worthy. But on the other side, and I think that's the main focus of the ideology, is about criticizing the West and criticizing all the things that have been achieved over the last 300 years because of the Enlightenment. And if you see it with that perspective, then a manifesto of someone saying, yes, away with the West doesn't sound really bad. Actually, it sounds really good if those are the core tenets of your ideas.
Right. I guess we have a second topic here, which I did not see. The topic is the potential hostage deal between Hamas and Israel. I really want to get into that. I have some very strong opinions about it here, as I suppose you guys will too. So Alejandro, you're saying that, you know, the culture has already been steeped in the anti-Western ideas. So it's all Osama bin Laden is doing is reflecting those anti-Western civilization ideas, and he's finding a mass reception in it because that's basically what the kids know. That's their narrative.
Yes.
And they probably resonate with it, because once again, oppression narratives seem to rule, don't they? Anders, doesn't it seem like if you're an oppressed person, you could claim yourself to be a part of an oppressed group, then you automatically gain moral stature. I feel like the whole world in the suppression narrative is one big second-handed group of folks looking for moral stature in the eyes of other people by claiming a victim status. And that's why we have all these divisions of groups into various genders and groups that have experienced some form of oppression, because they're looking for status in the world. What do you say about that, Mervyn?
Yeah, I think that's largely true. But are you thinking then that the people that we see here that sympathize with Hamas here in the West, so to speak, that they're identifying that they feel oppressed in a certain way, and that is why they identify with Hamas?
Some are, I think, but they also want to be seen as identifying with the oppressed. And what we see is a social contagion taking place where people are trying to virtue signal. I mean, this is a word that's only come online over the last 5 years, right? They're signaling their virtue to the rest of the world because they want to be seen as having a high moral status in the eyes of others.
Yeah, I certainly think there is an element of, you know, group pressure is probably part of it too, but whereas, you know, it's seen as hip and chic to go along with this narrative right now. But I mean, I think it goes deeper than that, though. It's more philosophical. These people may not be able to express those philosophical ideas, but it goes back to the fact that it's altruism and nihilism that is underlying all of this. Yeah, especially altruism, you know, the fact that, I mean, that's where the underdog and where the oppressed narratives come from. So
I agree. Kirk, do you agree with that? That altruism and collectivism, I would say, are the two big villains in this story.
Mm-hmm. Definitely, especially if you read the letter. Osama bin Laden is always using collectivistic language, talking about our people, our struggle, and whatnot. And yeah, again, the mysticism especially is all over the place in this letter. But to the extent that these people on TikTok are all about opposing oppression, I'm not sure if that's the case. Then they clearly don't know what oppression is, when Osama bin Laden highlights that his perception of oppression is that governments have prevented, quote unquote, our people from establishing Islamic Sharia law. That's what he views as oppression. And anyone who knows a lick of anything about Islamic law, Sharia law, theocracy, it's very oppressive. And just read Masih Alinejad's book and her writings on her experience growing up in the Islamic Republic of Iran. Read Malala Yousafzai's book, talking about her experience growing up in a region ruled by the Taliban. And that's another thing, you know, Osama bin Laden likes to talk as if he's some resistance fighter. Wasn't Al-Qaeda operating in Afghanistan that was ruled by the Taliban? You know, if he really cares about oppression, he'd be fighting the Taliban within Afghanistan. But from what I can tell, both Al-Qaeda and the Taliban, they're in agreement that Sharia law should rule. So obviously he would not view the Taliban as oppressive, I presume.
Well, it seems to me that, you know, the academia started out with this thing called multiculturalism, where they paralyze your judgment, your capacity to determine the differences and distinctions between cultures and to make moral judgments on those differences and distinctions. And so that now young people automatically presume all cultures are equal. And since Western culture claims to be the highest above them all, it falls right into their narrative. And so then we get the rinse, repeat cycle of the oppression narrative, trapping people in this epistemic hell that they're in. so that they're accepting these terrible ideas as if they're on par with ideas of Western civilization. Do you agree with that, Alejandro?
I do, and observe how little intellectual content that has. Because in the past, with traditional Marxists, you could say, okay, there's this group that has this kind of characteristics, let's say the proletariat, and then the bourgeoisie, and then you say they have these characteristics and they interact in such a way. And one of the things that you see in multiculturalism is, well, there's this collective which doesn't have any particular characteristic except of having power, and then you have another collective that doesn't have any power, and the thing that differentiates them is a power, and you cannot judge whatever is happening in each of the collective. What is happening is that one is better than the other just because it's able to exert more power, and to that extent. They don't differentiate between political and economic powers, of course, and they don't care about what's happening to the individuals in that country. Everything is just a judgment done on a very simple cases without any degree of dealing with the intrinsicies of, let's take a look at what this, how people in these countries live. Like, do they have a more flourishing life? No. The issue is, okay, someone is much better here because they can do some stuff. They have cars. They're able to live freer. Well, it must be that they must be oppressing the ones that do not have anything. So, to that extent, I do think that there is a lot of power, ideological power coming from there, and as of course from the idea of altruism.
I agree. So, Anders, what's the solution to this?
$1 million question, right? Well, it's there is no short-term solution, obviously. It's just a question of fighting for the right ideas and for the long term, and just hope that we have enough time to have those ideas take hold and win. And obviously right now it's very depressing what we're seeing, but I think there's an undercurrent of good ideas. And I think there are people who are, we still have to remember that we're talking about a minority here. So speaking for the US, I think there is a large majority that is still of regular people who are still pro-Israel. And, we saw a large demonstration in Washington, D.C. here a few days ago. So it's easy to get
which by the way was played down in most of the media outlets that I saw.
Exactly.
They talked about tens of, there were 300,000 people there, and they talked about tens of thousands of people.
Exactly. Yeah. So that was upwards of 300,000 people there. So I think there is it's easy to get caught up in what's going on right now, but at least for myself, I'm trying to take a step back and look at the broader context and kind of keep fighting the good fight and have objectivism make progress in long run, and with and even among obviously people who are not as philosophically committed as maybe we are. There are a lot of decent people out there, so we shouldn't forget that.
Kirk, do you agree with this? How do we make headway? How do we offer solutions in a culture that seems to be tilted against us, right? Algorithms seem to favor these left-wing insane people, and they give them tons of purchase in the culture, and they algorithm us out. So what do we do about that?
I goes back to ideas, and I think it was mentioned earlier, it's a real failure of the education system. I think Anders said it's $1 million question. Might be a $1.2 trillion question, because I think last time I checked, that's how much how much funding public schools K through 12 get in the United States. But even beyond that, you got to think of intellectuals like Noam Chomsky, who's been shaping the minds of many people in the media and politics for the last half century, and shaping people's minds to think of America as bad and the great evil in the world and whatnot. So yeah, it's going to take a lot of work. I don't know if there are any simple answers other than we got to privatize education and offer a positive view of the world, a positive view of man, and a positive view of America.
Is there anybody in the political establishment talking about privatizing education?
Fortunately, no.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Alejandro, any final words on this?
Just had a very moderate degree of envy in the rhetoric that he uses. And because he is very assertive, he says, okay, these are the grievances, and this is what you have to do. Could you imagine if we did the opposite, or the same, but with our ideas? I think that could be actually quite powerful, to say, okay, these are our grievances, and this is what we want to do, and the ones who don't support us will have these consequences. I think that could be as well quite powerful, and actually would be a much better document than the letter that this guy published.
So you're saying we need to oppose their moral certainty with our own moral certainty.
Indeed.
Well, folks, it looks like, go ahead, Kirk.
Oh, no, on top of that, I'm just thinking, like, what's the alternative that we're presented to a left-wing view of foreign policy and politics and whatnot? Increasingly on the right, I'm seeing a lot of calls for like stuff like Christian nationalism and some Christian-based theocracy. And, you know, if the left is saying, oh, well, this Osama bin Laden guy, you know, really opened my eyes. Meanwhile, he's preaching some form of theocracy. And then what we're increasingly getting from the right is some form of national conservatism or Christian nationalism. Then, you know, we need better ideas out there. And it seems like what we're seeing in opposition to the left, we're not getting much better in general.
Yeah, I agree. You know, the people who have half a brain on this issue are saying we need Western civilization. We need to unapologetically stand by Western civilization. And yet the right has co-opted the narrative of Western civilization to mean almost exclusively Judeo-Christian values, as opposed to the values of the Enlightenment. And now the right explicitly comes out against the Enlightenment and claims that it's actually the Enlightenment and the individualism of the Enlightenment that's causing all the chaos that we're seeing today, which I know everybody on this panel adamantly disagrees with. So apparently Israel and Hamas is thinking about, you know, dealing with the hostage situation. Hamas will release a few hostages for a bargained upon ceasefire for a specific amount of time. I personally think that human beings are not bargaining objects. I don't think they're chess pieces in a geopolitical game. I don't think they should be bargained for. I think that sends the worst kind of message to pathotypes like those who occupy Hamas, and that you should say, we refuse to bargain. There's only one way for this to end, and that is for you to completely release the hostages and dismantle, or to die. Sorry, it doesn't seem to be a very popular view of the way the war should be conducted. Anders, do you agree or disagree with me? Am I crazy?
Yeah, I completely agree with what you just said. This is an all or nothing deal. If there should be any discussions about hostage agreement, it's all or nothing. I mean, it's just disgraceful to see. I mean, I do understand if you're sitting in Israel and you have relatives and friends who are hostages right now. Yeah, I obviously feel for you deeply, but this is just playing into the hands of Hamas and of Iran and of every other future organization who has terrorist ambitions, you know. And then I have been looking, I haven't seen anything, but couple of days ago, I think, or it was yesterday, that it was announced that now the U.S. is freeing up or unfreezing $10 billion. Is it $10 billion or something?
Yeah, something like that.
Iran. Yeah. And I was wondering, so is that another thing that is part of these hostage negotiations? You know, and if it is, it's I mean, whether it is or not, it's disgraceful to unfreeze those funds. But yeah. It's such a mess.
Kirk, back in World War II, I think the Japanese were ready to surrender, but conditionally. And yet we pressed on the fight, pressed on the fight, pressed on the fight until we dropped 2 atomic bombs and they unconditionally surrendered. It seems like that time, which is now those actions, firebombing of Dresden, firebombing of Tokyo, Hiroshima, Nagasaki, are viewed almost as equivalent types of holocausts to the actual Holocaust that took place. But it seems to me those were morally clear times. If you're fighting Japanese imperialism and Nazism, worldwide fascism, you have to make it very clear to those who've accepted those ideologies that they bring horror and death upon them. Sherman understood this when he marched through Georgia. He understood that the planter class that was paying for the Confederacy needed to have the war brought to their doorsteps before they would understand that slavery was an institution that needed to be dropped, that it would bring death, destruction, and poverty to them if they continued in this way. So, I mean, Anders and I think it's an all or nothing proposition. They thought that way in World War II. What do you think? Do you think it's an all or nothing proposition, or can there be compromise here?
I would say, unfortunately, yes. And I say unfortunately because, as you guys mentioned, like, yeah, there are hostages who are still in Gaza, and I would love for them to be released and return home safely. And yeah, I'm always seeing posters around my area of the hostages who are still being held hostage. And I get the perception of, yeah, if you know some of these people, I mean, if I had a friend or a relative or a loved one who was taken hostage, I would definitely want them back. Unfortunately, yeah, if you cut a deal with Hamas and you get the hostages back, but leave Hamas in place, then you're ensuring that people in the future, especially in Israel, will be at risk, because you're sending the message to Hamas like, oh yeah, you can go into Israel and you can kill over 1,000 people so long as you take a few hostages back. And then Israel and the United States will come to their knees and try to negotiate a deal, and they'll do nothing to destroy you. So yeah, unfortunately, this madness will not end until Hamas is completely destroyed.
Yeah, Alejandro, why is this moral calculus so difficult for people to understand? That when you start an aggression, the ancillary fallout from the defender defending himself is not the defender's moral responsibility. Why is this so difficult to understand?
I think that is, first of all, a very conceptual terminology and very difficult to digest to some extent. I mean, at the end, you're pulling the trigger and someone dies. It would be natural to assume that you are the one who is the cause that is killing the person. But I think that can only be certain if you don't see the conflict as its full context. If you think that, if you see life as bits of things that have nothing in relation to the past, then it would be difficult to assume that something is a full chain of events that were triggered by a very specific set of actions. And if you combine that with the notion of determinism, especially some weird set of determinism that assumes that the ones who are more determined are the more evil of the people, then then it's very difficult to assume that someone is able to decide not to commit terrorist activities, and second of all, someone died. What relationship? Someone died in terrorist attacks a month and a half ago. What is the relationship to a couple of children dying now? So what I want to say is that it's a combination of a lot of pragmatist influence in the way that people think, and also a combination of determinism of the worst kind that influences this kind of view.
Lovely. We have a super chat, Catherine, for $1.99. Thank you. And Catherine again for $1.99. You cannot trust Hamas, period. Yes, that's true. You cannot trust Hamas. They are an organization of pathotypes, and they need to be eliminated. The world will be a much better place without them. Thank you very much. Well, folks, you guys have any final things to say about either of the topics before we head off into the sunset after having changed the culture as we know it from this little conversation?
Yeah, I'm wondering now, as Israel is entering and securing parts of Gaza, if there are Palestinians coming forward, because there are Palestinians in Gaza who are looking forward to an Israeli liberation of the territory because they have lived under Hamas for so long. And I wonder just if it would help in any of this if those people came forward and spoke out in favor of Israel. And just as we have seen that there are millions of Arabs who live peacefully in Israel today, and actually some of them were heroes during the terrorist attacks. And if that could be one way of helping us to change the narrative a little bit.
I think you're right. I've seen one video where a guy sardonically said, "Thank you, Hamas," and proceeded to list all the terrible things that Hamas was doing. I thought that was very profound. I wish more people, more Palestinians would stand up against Hamas. My fear is that they've been indoctrinated from the cradle to the grave, as many of our own youngsters have, with a particular ideology. And it's really difficult to break away from that. Once that poison is in your soul, it's really hard to get it out. Kirk, do you see? I think it's really, really hard to get it out. It's become a sense of life to them. And Rand used to talk about how difficult it is to change your sense of life.
Yeah, and I think, you know, reading through all this really does show the power of ideas. And then going back to the bin Laden letter, I mean, he starts by saying permission to fight against disbelievers is given to the believers who are fought against because they have been wronged, and surely Allah the able is able to give them believers victory. So he's specifically saying that this is a war on behalf of believers against non-believers. So yeah, it's pretty clear that bin Laden, he has a particular worldview that he wants to impose on everyone, and he's morally confident about it. And keep in mind that Osama bin Laden, this guy grew up in a very wealthy family, probably could have easily just lived the rest of his life in luxury. And this is the life he chose, was living a life of poverty and, you know, organizing terrorist organizations and waging war against powerful countries. And yeah, this guy was motivated by ideas. I don't think it was anything material or even necessarily power lusting. He just probably thought in what he was, he probably fought for what he was believing in, and what he believed in was pretty terrible. And I think people need to wake up to that.
That's right. People will always strive to be moral. Alejandra, any final comments from you?
I think just as a final comment on the negotiations, I'm very skeptical of all of them. Like, what would be I mean, Israel would win, like bringing back some of the hostages, but what would Hamas win from the deal? Yes, they are supposedly asking for some days of ceasefire, and as well that some of the prisoners that are held in Israel are brought back, supposedly children and women. But at the same time, I'm very skeptical of the way that it's put, especially maybe this is coming from a news source that might be more aligned with Hamas. But at the same time, I'm really I don't see why the full deal would be concretized. And given that Hamas hasn't been trustworthy at all, I would be worried that the deal would entail something more, and probably something much worse for Israel than would be said in public.
And it's kind of crazy that they put us all in the same moral category, the pro-Hamas, pro-Palestinian folks. They talk about Israelis firing indiscriminately. Not true. They don't fire indiscriminately. And killing women and children. Well, this is a fact, but it's a fact that Hamas makes us have to deal with. They place us in these metaphysical circumstances that then we have to deal with, which makes them morally culpable as far as I'm concerned. So yeah, the hard line and the true line, the reality line is it's all or nothing. Just like it had to be against the Nazis, just like it had to be against the imperialist Japanese, just like it has to be against any anti-civilizational enemy who's trying to kill you, unapologetically so. So folks, it's time to get morally certain about Western civilization. Not the way the right is painting Western civilization, but from the Enlightenment values of individualism. Find out what that is. Try to understand why collectivism and altruism are two of the most dangerous moral propositions that our civilization lives by. Divorce yourself from them and embrace individualism. That is the antidote to all of this. And when you are a sovereign individual, I think you'll be able to stand on your moral certainty against these crazy and brutal collectivists. Upcoming shows today at 7 p.m. UK time, new video on the Briefly Objective with James Valiant, negotiating with terrorists, link in the chat. I wonder what that's going to say. Well, folks, it's been great having you guys on the panel. I hope we were able to produce some value for the viewers out there. I hope we gave them some moral clarity so that they can go out into this insane world with a little bit of peace of mind. Folks, it's been great seeing you. Thank you for joining us today on The Reality Show. If you like the content, like and subscribe, pass these ideas around. They need to be out there in the universe. And while you're doing that, please remember to check your premises. Peace.
Recording